Welcome to the Daily Bite. I'm your host, Pastor Steve Andrews. Today we look at Acts chapter 12. About that time, Herod the king laid violent hands on some who belonged to the church. He killed James, the brother of John, with a sword, and when he saw that it pleased the Jews, he proceeded to arrest Peter also. This was during the days of unleavened bread, and when he had seized him, he put him in prison, delivering him over to 4 squads of soldiers to guard him, intending after the Passover to bring him out to the people. So Peter was kept in prison, but earnest prayer for him was made to God by the church. Now when Herod was about to bring him out on that very night, Peter was sleeping between 2 soldiers bound with 2 chains, and sentries before the door were guarding the prison. And behold, an angel of the Lord stood next to him, and a light shone in the cell. He struck Peter on the side and woke him, saying, "Get up, quickly." And the chains fell off his hands. And the angel said to him, "Dress yourself and put on your sandals." And he did so. And he said to him, "Wrap your cloak around you and follow me." And he went out and followed him. He did not know that what was being done by the angel was real, but he thought he was seeing a vision. When they had passed the first the second guard, they came to the iron gate leading into the city. It opened for them of its own accord, and they went out and went along one street, and immediately the angel left him. When Peter came to himself, he said, "Now I am sure that the Lord has sent his angel and rescued me from the hand of Herod and from all that the Jewish people were expecting." When he had realized this, he went to the house of Mary, the mother of John, whose other name was Mark, where many were gathered together and were praying. And when he knocked at the door of the gateway, a servant girl named Rhoda came to answer. Recognizing Peter's voice, in her joy she did not open the gate, but ran in and reported that Peter was standing at the gate. And they said to her, "You are out of your mind." But she kept insisting that it was so, and they kept saying, "It is his angel." But Peter continued knocking, and when they opened, they saw him and were amazed. But motioning to them with his hand to be silent, he described to them how the Lord had brought him out of the prison. And he said, "Tell these things to James and to the brothers." Then he departed and went to another place. Now when day came, there was no little disturbance among the soldiers over what had become of Peter. And after Herod searched for him and did not find him, he examined the sentries, and ordered that they should be put to death. Then he went down from Judea to Caesarea, and spent time there. Now Herod was angry with the people of Tyre and Sidon, and they came to him with one accord, and having persuaded Blastus, the king's chamberlain, they asked for peace, because their country depended on the king's country for food. On an appointed day, Herod put on his royal robes, took his seat upon the throne, and delivered an oration to them. And the people were shouting, "The voice of a god, not of a man." Immediately an angel of the Lord struck him down, because he did not give God the glory, and he was eaten by worms and breathed his last. But the word of God increased and multiplied, and Barnabas and Saul returned from Jerusalem when they had completed their service, bringing with them John, whose other name was Mark. This is the word of the Lord. Our text today begins with Herod. This is probably Herod Agrippa, who served in the years of 37 to 44 AD. So we've had a few years here that have passed since the time of Jesus' resurrection. We're not exactly sure how many, because we don't know the exact year of Christ's death and resurrection. But we think most of historians probably looking at the range of 6 to 4 BC when Jesus would have been born. So if we give him that 33 years that we see kind of mentioned as a possibility in Scripture for the length of his ministry, I think that's Luke saying Jesus was about 30 years old and then about a 3-year ministry. So 33 on top of, even if we go with the closer number of 4, that still puts Jesus' resurrection probably around 29 AD. So some years have passed here as the church is going about doing what the church is supposed to do. And Herod attacks the church. This isn't the first persecution of the church. Saul himself was part of that earlier persecution. But now we have another. And Herod is going to kill one of Jesus' inner circle. Peter, James, and John. He kills James, the brother of John, sons of Zebedee. Now, he does it with the sword that makes it sound to our common ear as though Herod himself did it. And that's certainly possible. His authority, his position of authority, however, would allow for this to represent somebody else doing the actual swinging of the sword or stabbing, whichever way it happened. That if Herod ordered for this to be done, then Herod is still responsible for the action, even though it may not have physically been his hand on the sword. It's hard to say. The text does make it seem like it might have been Herod himself. He notices that the death of James is pleasing to the Jewish people. Now, I'm going to pause before I give you my response to that. But this is one where you can ask your children, should we be happy when the people we don't like die? Should we be happy when our enemies die? Should we be happy when bad people die? The answer to that question is actually no. It's a sad thing here that the Jews are pleased by the death of their opponent, James. In fact, as you go back to their Old Testament, which is our Old Testament, Ezekiel chapter 33, verse 11, God does not desire the death of the wicked, but that the wicked would turn from his wicked way and live. So the Jews, at this point in history, and really most people in most times of history, have gotten to such a bad spot where they actually rejoice, they revel when the people they dislike die. And the scriptures just don't teach us to live that way. Death is not a good thing. Death is an enemy. And the people we think of as our enemies, whether they're school bullies or just people that despise us, whoever it may be, they're not really our enemies. They've been deceived. They've been misled. And if they die in that time of being away from the Lord, they go to hell. And we don't desire that for anyone. So this could be a really deep conversation with your children to have at this time. So Herod, realizing that the Jews are happy by this, goes ahead and puts Peter in prison as well. And the note here is that it happened during the festival of unleavened bread. Now that's going to be important timing-wise, and I'm not sure the exact answer as to why. So they put him in prison, intending after the Passover to bring him out to the people. So why wait? And that's going to depend on how you take after the Passover too. So the Feast of Unleavened Bread is a week-long celebration that is also sometimes referred to as the Passover. So this could go a few different ways. If you're looking at the after the Passover as being after the initial celebration, so still happening during the week, then Herod's bringing him out into the crowd of bloodthirsty Jews. And that seems pretty likely here when you read on with Peter's escape from the prison. The other options, though, is that he's waiting until after the whole celebration is over, in which case most of the Jewish people have left and they've returned to their surrounding villages and towns and communities that they live in. So this could be that Herod feared the reaction of the larger crowd. It could be that Herod was trying to get Peter away from crowds so that Peter couldn't preach any longer. So there's some options here, and the text just doesn't make it so that we can clearly identify Herod's motive for putting Peter into prison and then bringing him out after. But while he's in prison, the church is praying for him. It's a good reminder for us that we should pray for one another as the church today as well. Now, the night Peter is going to be brought out, or the next day, an angel of the Lord comes and delivers him. So he's in between soldiers, bound by chains. There's guards at the door. I mean, there's no way out. And yet, in the middle of the night, an angel comes and rescues him. I mean, the fact that he comes to Peter, and Peter is the only one who hears him or sees him because the other guys remain asleep. Even the guards at the door. That's miracle 1 of this event. Miracle 2, the chains fell off his hands. Miracle 3, is going to be the guards that you've got at the door not seeing them. And miracle 4, the iron gate opens of its own accord, so nobody even opened the gate, it just opens for Peter. So you've got the angel here working this miraculous rescue from prison for Peter. Peter, in the meantime, himself didn't realize it was actually real. He thinks he's having a vision. So not just any dream, as we think of dreaming, but actually a specific dream that the Lord was trying to show him something, perhaps where he should go when he gets out of prison. Might have been on his mind, but he realizes eventually that this is not the case, and instead declares in verse 11 why this must have happened. That the Lord has rescued him from the sufferings that the Jewish people were expecting. So suffering was awaiting Peter that next day, maybe even execution. It's hard to say. Verse 12, Peter then goes to Mary's house. There's a lot of Marys in the New Testament. This is the Mary who is related to Barnabas, perhaps cousins with him, and whose son goes by the names of John and Mark. Sometimes we just call him John Mark. Sometimes we just call him Mark. Mark is the one who wrote the second gospel account that we have. So Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. He wrote Mark of that 4. And he's also going to be seen later in this book of Acts as one who travels with both Barnabas and Paul in the time to come. So we're going to see more of him, but for now, it's just noting that this is his house where the church is gathering together in prayer. There's a servant who hears Peter knock at the door, and she does... This strikes me as something a child would do, right? Somebody comes to the door, and instead of letting them in, they just get really excited that companies come, and they go and tell people. So instead of letting Peter in the house, she just goes and tells the people inside. They don't believe her. They say she's out of her mind, and then they themselves say something crazy. It's his angel, whatever that's supposed to mean. I really couldn't tell you. And then eventually, finally, they open the door for him and realize that it is him. He tells them what has happened, tells them to pass word along to James and the rest of the brothers. James is the brother of Jesus, like the physical brother of Jesus, Mary, Joseph, child kind of brother of Jesus. And he's going to be, even though he didn't believe in Jesus when Jesus was still present in his earthly ministry, after the resurrection, James repents and comes to faith. And he goes on to be one of the earliest leaders in that city of Jerusalem. So this is not the same James as the one that was a disciple of Jesus that Herod killed at the beginning of the chapter. Now, evil does what evil does. And so Herod, when he realizes that Peter has escaped, obviously, not believing in miracles, believes that the soldiers had something to do with it, so he executes them. He puts the soldiers to death. Peter himself travels northward from Judea to Caesarea. If you draw a line from the Sea of Galilee on a map, southwest towards the Mediterranean Sea, that's about where Caesarea is. If you draw it to the northwest of the Sea of Galilee out to the Mediterranean Sea, that's about where Tyre and Sidon are, which are mentioned in the next passage. So Tyre and Sidon had gotten on Herod's bad side, which is bad for them because he provides for them. And so they seek peace, and when they get that situation, they have a festival of some kind, and they celebrate Herod as a god. Now this is not uncommon in that era. I mean, all the Caesars of Rome declared themselves to be gods. It's been common, I think, in a good chunk of human history that leaders have done this kind of thing. And so they say the voice of a god and not of a man, and because Herod does not deny it, because Herod does not take that opportunity to give credit to the true God who has given him the authority that he has, God punishes him by taking his life. So that's an extreme situation. But the Lord does work that way from time to time when he sees fit. All of the governors in this world, all earthly authorities, have their authority from him. And each and every one of them is going to have to give an account to God someday for how they managed that authority. Herod did not manage his well. Now, verse 24, the gospel spreads, still increases, multiplies. This is a chance to talk to your children about persecution. You can ask them the question, did persecution stop the gospel from spreading, or did it actually help the gospel spread? And the answer to that's the second one. We see both in Acts chapter 8 how the spreading of the gospel happens after Saul persecutes the church. And we see it again here as Herod persecutes the church. The really a neat way, and I should have thought of this back then, if you're open to making a mess, make a little bowl of paint, like just pour some paint into a puddle, or a little bowl of some kind, and set it on a piece of paper. You want enough that it's going to splash, and then take something like a rock or a marble or something that has a little bit of weight to it, that when you toss it into that bowl, it's going to make the paint splatter. Because what you want to do then is see that's what happened with the persecution of the church. So go ahead and toss that thing in there, let your kids do it, let the paint make a bit of a mess, and as you see how the paint has spread everywhere, so the gospel spread everywhere. As the church fled from that spot where the persecution struck, they took the gospel with them. And it's looking fairly similar here in verse 24 as well. Now, verse 25, Barnabas and Saul returned from Jerusalem after completing their service. That's probably a reference to chapter 11, verse 29, that they had heard of the famine and they had taken money, a collection, from the brothers living throughout Judea. They had taken it to the elders, which probably means they took it to Jerusalem. So it might be that is the reference point here. So they've done that work, and now together with John Mark, they have returned, which is a reference to Antioch, as we'll see at the start of tomorrow's text.